And the story continues. Please, can you help me get back to the orphanage? My four will be worried by now, and I am scared of what the others may do to them if they think I am not coming back. Your four? He asked, looking confused. Who or what are they? I began, wondering how I can explain it to him with they are the children directly under my care, I said at last. How old are you, please? He asked, the look of confusion still on his face. According to the records, I am 12, soon to be 13, I said, feeling proud of myself. You are taking care of four children? He asked incredulously. Yes, still beaming with pride. They are directly under my protection, I said. I thought you said you are staying in an orphanage, he asked quietly. Immediately, I recalled where I was and I knew I had fibbed, what we use for giving out too much information. I began to think of a way I could set the record right again. But he stood and asked me to follow him. When he stepped out of the office, he called to one of the men on suit, and they whispered for a while. I took the opportunity to look around and found out that the hall leading to the office was empty, except for the uniformed men standing around. I began to wonder again who the gentleman was. There was an information just at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't take a hold of it. I couldn't lay a hold of it. He looked familiar somehow. Just don't know how I could possibly know someone who looks so important. Maybe someone who had been at the orphanage looked like him, I concluded, when I couldn't recollect. By this time, he had finished talking with the suit man and squatted down in front of me. He asked if I had eaten. I nodded and shook my head at the same time. He nodded as if understanding. He then asked if I trusted him. That question came out from nowhere, so I didn't know what to say at first. But I nodded so I will not offend him. But thinking about it later, I realized that I actually trusted him. I felt safe around him, like he was capable of protecting me from any danger, even though I didn't know him from anywhere. When I nodded, he smiled, his eyes warming up even more as a result. He stood up then and held out his hand. I took it and we started walking. On the way, he told me we were going to lodge in a nearby hotel, and first thing tomorrow, we will go to the orphanage after visiting his father. He turned to ask me if that was okay. I nodded again, wondering why he kept seeking for my opinion as though it will make any difference. We got to the hotel and I was served the best meal I had ever had. The only thing that dumped my mood was the fact that my four may still be awake, with hunger and worry as their companion. But I cheered myself with the thought that only a few hours remained, so I ate because I couldn't help it. I was so hungry. Following day, I was woken up with a gentle knock on the door, but I jerked up confused at first, until the events of the previous day started coming back. I quickly went to open the door, and there was the gentleman, all dressed up in fresh clothes. I looked at the gown I was given last night to change into, and wondered what they did with my clothes. He must have sensed what I was thinking because he stretched forth his hand, and I saw he was holding some clothes, new clothes with labels and everything. I looked up at him, wondering who those were for. Go on, he said. Have a pick of any and get dressed. We need to get going. I took the clothes from him and he stepped back and closed the door. I was left standing at the door and clothes in my hands, wondering what is really going on. I gathered myself and ran to the bathroom, eyeing the bed on my way. I have never slept in anything as soft and comfortable as that all my life. I didn't know when I slept, and I doubt if I turned at all throughout the night. The first time I slept through the night without waking up in fear. I had my bath and took a dress randomly from the three he brought. He even gave me underwear. I stepped out after getting dressed, wondering where I should go, but I need not to have worried because the moment I shut the door, he was right there by the corner waiting. He turned, looking me up and down. He smiled as if satisfied and held out his hand again. I took it, coming to the conclusion that this man must really like holding hands, because how else can you explain it? We went back to the hospital and thankfully his father's health had turned for the better. After talking with the doctor and some persons that were waiting for him, he told me to come with him. We drove for a long time. I was scared of asking him where we were going, but somehow I knew I was safe. My instinct has been sharpened as a result of the hard and unpredictable life I have had to live as an orphan, or rather an abandoned child. If the people who birthed me lives, I have no idea whatsoever. We eventually got to a familiar place and I realized we were going to the orphanage. I turned and looked at him, smiling so wide. He smiled back, looking pleased. I am glad to finally see you smile. You should smile more, he said. At this point, I was too happy to feel any other thing. I can't believe I am so happy at returning to this God-forsaken place. But it wasn't really the orphanage, but the people I had left behind. We got to the place. I looked at him. I was not surprised to see the shock on his face. The place was a total ruin. I always wondered how it is still standing. I walked in and they followed. I met some of the children playing outside, but before we could enter the main hall, I saw the mistress running as if her behind had caught fire. Someone must have called her attention. So we stood and waited. She came close and didn't know if she should curtsy or lie down. She was literally doing both. When she gathered herself, she came towards me spreading her arms. I sidestepped her hug, looking at her worriedly. I hope she has not finally lost it. Because why in the world is she crying and trying to hug me? Oh, my lovely girl, how could you run away like that? We searched and searched for you, to no avail, she panted, her tears coming in torrents now. I thought something bad had happened to you. I am so glad you are okay. But she was interrupted by the gentleman. What is your name, madam? He asked, his voice stiff. I didn't wait to hear her answer because 3 out of my 4 came running out then, so I rushed towards them, crying now, so relieved to see that they were okay. I looked around expecting the 4th, but he didn't show. I released the ones I was holding. They understood my look, and the oldest said he was sleepy. I let go of them and hurried inside, knowing immediately that something was wrong. Carton does not sleep in the middle of the day, even if he is sick. So whatever was making him sleep was bad. Hating it even more then that I had left them alone. I got to my corner and met him lying down with a cloth tied around his head. Before I could get to him, one of the military men who must have followed me lifted him from the floor, and I saw a pool of blood where his head had been. Can't explain what happened next, because everything dimmed and all I could hear was the blood rushing up my ears. The military man had carried Carton and was running outside. I gathered my 3 and rushed after him, pushing them ahead of me. I saw the gentleman opening the back of the vehicle and I jumped him behind my 3. The door was not even properly closed before the driver zoomed out. I stood up to look at Carton as he laid in the arms of the man as though lifeless. Please, not again. I can't lose another. Steve was enough. Blue, the youngest, held my hand, and that touch brought a comfort I couldn't explain. It helped me to calm down enough to ask them what happened. When you didn't return with the mistress and others, Muddy, the second 4 years old, began. Autumn went to Jason to ask him where you were, and Jason told him you ran away, that they stopped to buy things from the market and you didn't come back. The news must have spread because Iron came to take our corner, but Carton, trying to stop him, was pushed against the wall and the other children began to hit him with their sticks. They only stopped when blood started coming out from his head. They all ran away, leaving him in the pool of his own blood. Green came in then because he had been outside when the commotion was happening and helped to bound the head with cloth. But the mistress refused to come out from her room when we went to tell her. Green promised that in the morning he would talk to the mistress. but we should keep him warm till then and make sure the wound is bound tightly. He came once or twice to our corner to check on Carton throughout the night. We waited, not believing that you had run away. Instead, we were scared that they had done something to you and lied to us that you ran away. It was Green that came to tell us that you were back with some important-looking people this morning when the other children were running outside to see who came with the car. But we couldn't go because we were scared of leaving Carton alone. But when Green told us it was you, we had to run to you, he concluded, hugging me and began to cry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect him, he said between tears. Hush now. I am glad you didn't do anything. If not, they would have hurt you too. I am so sorry I left you alone, I said to them, as I sat back on the chair and gathered them as much as my little arms could. Not minding who was present, we cried together, hoping and praying with our tears that our warrior would be fine. I felt hands around my shoulders. I looked up and saw the gentleman hugging us, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I was surprised, but my mind was too filled with Carton, so there was no room to dwell on it like that. Carton was taken to the nearest hospital we could find along the way. For hours, we didn't see the doctor or any of the nurses. I must have dozed off, but I was startled awake when I heard the sound of wheels on the tiled floor. And there was Carton, his face swollen and almost unrecognizable, tubes and wires crisscrossed all over him. I stood up gently so I would not wake the others sleeping, but Blue, the youngest, held onto my hand, even though she was fast asleep. So I just stood there looking at Carton as he was wheeled into a room at the end of the hallway. The man who had carried Carton came in then. He stood looking at me. I didn't know what to say to him. Was thank you enough? Or was I supposed to say more? Geisha wondered. But the man saved the situation when he said, His Excellency unfortunately had to go, but he commanded that you all be taken good care of until he is able to return again. His Excellency? Isn't that supposed to be a term for presidents and governors? Why is the gentleman being addressed? Wait! No wonder, she exclaimed, putting her hand in her mouth immediately as she realized she had spoken out loudly. She looked at the uniformed man. Her face must be looking funny because the man was trying his best not to laugh. I'm sorry, sir, for shouting, Geisha apologized, mortified. He squatted down in front of her and said, For a young girl who grew up without any training or supervision, you have better manners and decorum than most. You need not to apologize, okay? Geisha nodded, surprised at his kindness. He had initially come off as gruff and unapproachable, but that may not be the case. Perhaps she had judged him too fast, she thought to herself. My name is John Thompson. You can call me John or Mr. Thompson, whichever you feel comfortable with. He waited until she nodded. May I please know your name? He asked. Geisha, she whispered. He smiled and stood up then, looking behind her at the three. As they lay sprawled on the chair, they must not have slept last night, with Carton bleeding, and she not being around, they looked so tired. Please, can we go see Carton now? Geisha said, hoping he doesn't say no. He nodded and moved behind her, lifting Muddy and Light easily, waiting until I carried Blue as well. She opened her eyes briefly when I removed my hand from her so I could carry her. But immediately she latched onto the collar of my dress and slept back, snoring softly. Something lodged in my throat then because I felt her fear. Even deeply asleep, she was scared I may disappear again like yesterday. I held on to her tightly, silently promising her that it will never happen again. Not while I still had breath in me. We walked down the hall. When we entered Carton's room, if not for all the tubes and beeping machines, I would have called it cozy. The bed was so big that he looked like a baby in it. The room was large and clean, with nice framed pictures of flowers on the wall. I moved closer to the bed and looked at Mr. Thompson. He nodded, reading my intention. So I held Carton's hand. They felt cold to the touch. I panicked for the briefest moment, a distant memory flashing before my eyes. But in a brief moment, Carton squeezed my hand ever so slightly. It was so brief and light that I would have missed it if I wasn't looking. I cried out, muffling the sound in Blue's neck. My warrior was going to be okay. Even while he is in such state, he must have known I would be worried. That action from him gave me all the hope I needed. Even when there was a complication some days later, I held on to that effort he made from his subconscious for me. I held on to it and I prayed. Even though I didn't know how to, I just kept repeating a Bible passage I had come across in one Christian magazine, which stuck to my head ever since. To turn aside the justice due a man before the face of the Most High, or to subvert a man in his cause, the Lord does not approve. Lamentations 3 verses 35 and 36. I prayed however I could. I didn't think God would mind. And Carton lived. He survived to the amazement of the doctors, and his recovery was with such speed that it was called a miracle. While Carton was at the hospital, we were taken to a house not too far from it, so we could visit, and we always stayed until nightfall. When he was still critical, I refused to leave his bedside. This one will not be taken from me like Steve. And because I didn't move, Muddy, Blue, and Light refused to leave my side. But when I saw how tired they always looked, despite eating whatever they fancied, and sleeping on padded mats on the floor of Carton's room, and Carton was cared for better than anything we have ever had, I agreed to go, with the promise that we will come every day to stay with him. They had kept to their promise, and after a few days of going and coming, Muddy and Light had started getting used to the people taking care of us. But Blue has refused to stay anywhere I was not found. So she was the only one who went back and forth with me every day to stay with Carton. The gentleman, no, His Excellency, I found out was actually the president of the country. That was why his face had seemed familiar. I must have seen his picture in one of the books or magazines I read back at the orphanage. So it turned out I had saved the father of the president. The elderly man has been discharged but still under supervision when I asked after him. Throughout Carton's stay at the hospital, the gentleman, that is, what he will always be to me, no matter the position he may occupy. So the gentleman couldn't visit, but he calls every morning and sometimes at night to speak with all three of us, and then Carton when he could talk. He made sure we were treated well. Not just well, we were treated the way I imagined royalty was treated. Whatever Blue and the rest demanded was given to them. At some point, it became a game of is it possible with them. They demanded for things they thought was impossible, but just to see if they could get it. But the very next day, their requests were brought home. They now have every toy their minds could cook up. We wear new clothes every day. We eat whatever we wanted, anytime we wanted it. Sleep on the softest of beds. We were put in different rooms at first, but the children couldn't sleep. They ended up coming back to my room in the middle of the night, and Mr. Thompson found us sleeping on the floor the next morning, as the bed couldn't take the four of us. I came back from the hospital that evening to meet a much bigger bed that can comfortably take all, including Carton. So we now sleep together. Well, they sleep. Spend most of the nights rearranging them because they seem to have developed weird sleeping pattern of throwing any part of their body on me. I don't know how they managed to do that. Each of them making sure that a part of them is touching a part of me. It doesn't matter if it is my eyes or mouth. It was uncomfortable at first because they never used to sleep like that while we were at the orphanage. But when I realized what was really happening, I didn't bother to rearrange them anymore. I just improvised and started sleeping at the foot of the bed. with their feet placed on my body. Although Blue also changed position to sleep by my side, refusing the position I gave her. But the rest seemed satisfied with the new arrangement, so the weird sleeping positions had ended. And I could finally sleep without body parts all over me. But I had a fear at the back of my mind. How long is this going to last? I was afraid of what the future holds for us. How are we going to cope when this ends? Because I wasn't expecting a stranger to continue to take care of us, no matter if he was the president. I have lived my life alone for too long to expect anything else from anyone, but I still hoped for the sake of the little ones that help will be rendered. I can always take care of myself. But it turned out I had nothing to fear, because on the day Carton was discharged, the gentleman came to the hospital with an elderly man on a wheelchair. I was shocked to be told it was his dad. He had added so much flesh that I couldn't recognize him. He told me to come close, and when I did, he hugged me to himself. He smelled like orange. I hugged him back. I hugged him back. I am getting good at this hugging business, I thought passively. When he eventually let go, he smiled and said, "Can you be my granddaughter?" That came out of nowhere. At first, I didn't understand what he meant by that, so I looked at the gentleman for clarification. Perhaps granddaughter meant a different thing than I had read in books. He laughed, coming close to where we were and squatted down looking at me. "What do you say to that? Would you like to be his granddaughter?" I was lost for words, but I was able to ask him whose daughter I would be then. Everyone busted out laughing. I didn't think it was funny, so I didn't understand why they were all laughing. The gentleman took my hands and said, "If you will do me the honor of being my daughter, you see, I have only one son and my wife is late." "I am sorry," I said without thinking, but he smiled and nodded. "Thank you for that. You are a very kind child." I looked down at my feet. I knew what it means to lose a loved one, so I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I said nothing. He continued, "My son would have been here today, but he is writing his exams. But he's eager to meet you. So if you will like it, I would like to adopt you as my daughter. So can you become my father's granddaughter?" I lost my footing, but he caught me before I touched the floor, cushioning our fall with his body. He looked at me with worry spread across his face. I heard his father shouting for the doctor. I saw light, blue and muddy, rushing to where I was, fear written all over their faces. I quickly gathered myself and told them I was fine, but the doctor was around then. So the gentleman, refusing anyone to carry me, took me into the doctor's office, my three and his father coming behind us. After the doctor checked, he told them I was fine. Maybe it was excitement or something. Blue came close to where I was then and clutched my hand, looking so frightened. I sat up and lifted her to my lap, assuring her I was okay. The other two also came and stood beside me, holding onto my hand. I looked up at the adults as they stared at us, a look of wonder or maybe shock on their faces. What may have caused that, I can't tell. Or haven't they seen family together before? After Carton was discharged with instructions on checkups and medications, we were driven back to the house with the gentleman and his father in the vehicle behind us. In the evening of that same day, the gentleman who had stayed behind after his father left called me to the sitting room after pleading with the others to excuse us. But Blue, as usual, refused to stay behind, so I took her along. He brought up the adoption talk again. This time I was ready. So I told him I would have loved the idea of being his daughter, but I have the four to look after, and I wasn't going anywhere without them. If that was all, I said yes. So he said that was not a problem because he had seen how attached they were to me, so he will adopt the five of us. I held on to Blue and cried, feeling as though a weight I hadn't realized were on my shoulders had been lifted. I felt so light, so free. It was a feeling I don't have words to describe, so I cried. Blue, not understanding, joined me too. The four must have had Blue because they rushed out of the room, including Cotton, looking at the gentleman in accusation. But I quickly dried my tears and told them the good news. Cotton went to the gentleman with his hand stretched out for a handshake, his eyes brimming with tears. The gentleman, I should have called him Dad now, hugged Carton instead, wiping his eyes as well. I think you all are going to make my life a fulfilled one, so I should be thanking you, he said. As he hugged each person with a deep hug, apart from me and themselves, they have never been hugged, so it was a bit strange to them at first. That was how we became the children of the most important man in the whole country. But our adoption was finalized after his tenure in office. The mistress ran and hid, but she was eventually found and sent to prison. Other children were rehabilitated. I made a special request concerning Green. He is currently training in the Navy on his request. The orphanage has been torn down and rebuilt with modern facilities and enough staff under special supervision taking care of the children there. They now have schools and playgrounds. Each time I visit, I always marvel at how much a little kindness can do. One of the persons that kidnapped Grandpa was caught. After interrogation, he confessed that others were dead. He was the only survivor. He was jailed for life without option of bail. The mistress showed us where Steve was buried, so finally I was able to pay my respects. I and my four always visited where he was reburied and always tell him all that had been happening. Though he is no more, but I know he is rejoicing at the turn of events. My name became Geisha Gracelyn Philip. My four were also registered under the same surname. We took our dad's first name. Our grandpa wasn't too happy about it, but he relented, saying, having 5 grandchildren at once is enough. I met Joshua, our big brother, and I knew another Steve had been given to me. In a short time, we became inseparable. I had to always settle quarrel between him and Blue because they are always arguing over who my favorite was, until Josh decided to stop teasing her and let her win. So as long as Blue was concerned, she was my favorite person in the whole world, and no one dared argue with her. What she doesn't understand is that she was our favorite person in the whole world. There was nobody in the family, the whole country even, who wouldn't do anything for her. Our dad is the absolute best, despite how busy his schedule was. He made time to spend with us so he can know us and for us to become comfortable with him. In no time, Carton was already talking about world leaders and politics with him. You could see him beaming with pride from a mile away. We were all registered in school at the level of our performance, and for children who never saw the four walls of a school, we were told we performed beyond expectation. But Blue couldn't cope at first, so I homeschooled with her until she turned 7 and became a firecracker. The formerly shy baby became an orator at 7. You can't win her in an argument. Our weekends were the most fun because we get to see Grandpa and some of our cousins too. Josh and Dad comes home too on most weekends. So it was always a memorable weekend, each one surpassing the last. Muddy stuck to the name, taking only the surname, and Light too. She preferred her given name. In fact, none of us changed our names. I only took a second name in addition to the surname to please my dad. I watched them blossoming into the most beautiful, happy, kind people who stole the hearts of all they came in contact with. Our lives took a turn at a time I least expected, but that scripture never left my lips. And in thanksgiving, I pray it, grateful to the God who had shown mercy to a poor abandoned child. My life has shown that indeed, to turn aside the justice due a man before the face of the Almighty, or to subvert a man in his cause, the Lord does not approve. The end. Hi. Hope you enjoyed the story. For as many who are crying for justice, I pray that God will come to you speedily. Amen. Please check my other videos. I hope you'll be blessed by them also. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. I would love to hear from you. Until next story, remain strong, remain blessed, and continue to conquer. Bye.